So welcome to the third edition of the seminar series on Sephardi modernities, co-sponsored by the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies at Brandeis University and the Bilsberg Program for Israel Studies at University of Calgary. The title of this year's series is The Future of Our Histories, Recollecting the Past, Projecting the Future, and it's organized by Yuval Ivri and myself, Angy Cohen. The theme of this year's seminar is the scholarly frameworks from which to approach the diversity of Jewish experiences of modernization and the social, political, and cultural implications of such frameworks. This year, we want to explore the multiplicity of identities at play in the different Sephardi experiences of modernity, and to rethink the disciplinary separations that inform our approaches to identity, history, and culture. As it is customary in our seminar, I will first briefly summarize the arguments of the previous session, as we believe that this is not just a series of unrelated talks, but rather different points in a constellation of ideas and concepts. In our previous session, Ella Shohat approached some of the theoretical and methodological challenges faced by researchers of Sephardi modernities within the epistemic frameworks of the field called Jewish studies. Shohat spoke about the question of origins and beginnings and their constructed nature, or more specifically, the function of origins in the context of certain histories. She applied these ideas to the case of 1492 as an origin. On the one hand, she pointed to the disconnection in the field of Jewish studies between 1492 and the expulsion of Sephardic Jews from the fall of Granada and the Reconquista, thus separating Jews and Muslims. But there is another 1492, which is the discovery of America, often equally separated from the expulsion and the fall of Granada. Shohat discussed how the ideological apparatus of the Conquista was equipped with the phobic ideas about Jews and Muslims taken from the Reconquista, ideas which were then applied to the conceptualization of the Americas and indigenous people. Finally, Shohat spoke about the importance of cutting through the limitations of area studies, as well as adopting a transdisciplinarity that welcomes metaphors, discourses, analogies, or linked analogies, as she put it. This is a way of traveling through knowledge and formulating ideas, and a way of thinking about memory, history, and identities and their formation. Today, we are welcoming Yoram Meital, professor of Middle Eastern Studies at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. He has written on various research topics pertaining to Arab societies during the modern era. However, Egypt's social, cultural, political, and economic developments have captivated his attention more than any other field. His last book, Revolutionary Justice, Special Courts, and the Formation of Republican Egypt, was published by Oxford University Press in 2017. During the last 30 years, he studied the history of the Jewish community and sites in Egypt. Over many visits to Cairo and Alexandria, he documented the changes in various communal sites, synagogues, schools, libraries, and cemeteries, photographs and written notes. These constitute rich, unique, and highly informative sources on the history of the Egyptian Jewish community. Since 2017, he is serving as the historical consultant to the Jewish community in Cairo, and he is involved in the projects for the preservation of Egyptian Jewish heritage. He recently finished writing a book about the Jewish community in Cairo, and in this lecture, he will be sharing with us the research findings he presents in his book. Before we start, let me remind you that the seminar will be structured as usual, 45 minutes of presentation and half an hour of Q&A. I will be moderating the chat, so you are all welcome to write your questions there. If someone wishes to open their mic and ask their question directly to the speaker, you're more than welcome to do so, but just make sure to let me know on the chat and wait for your turn. Professor Yoram Meital, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Angy, for this kind introduction. I'm delighted to join this seminar and grateful for the opportunity to present at least part of my recent study. So, and I'm very happy to see some a friend among the audience. Very nice to see all of you. This lecture focuses on the unprecedented shift in recent years in Egypt concerning its local Jewish heritage. This shift is reflected in popular culture, the public discourse, and the authorities' rhetoric. This shift also includes unprecedented projects for the preservation of Egyptian Jewish heritage promoted by the Jewish community in Cairo and its president, Mrs. Magda Harun, who is with us today. At least she tries to log in. I hope she succeeded in this. I got some difficulties, so I hope Magda is with us or join us very soon. Okay, interestingly, I would say, and important to emphasize, the shift concerning the history of the local Jewish community was first, and I would like to underline this, Angy, first reflected in popular culture, in Egyptian popular culture. Many Egyptians were exposed to revisionist narratives through the two-part documentary on Yahud Masr about the Jews of Egypt. Can I do a share screen now? Okay. So I start saying that many Egyptians were exposed to this revisionist narrative through the two-part documentary on Yahud Masr about the Jews of Egypt, 2013, 2014, by the brilliant Amir Ramses, an Egyptian director. Millions followed the TV series Harat el-Yahud, the Jewish quarter or the Jewish neighborhood, in 2015. You can see it here. A diverse and complex reality about Egyptian Jews provided by Kamal Ruhayim in a trilogy centered on the life of Galal and his quest to find his identity in Egypt during the second half of the 20th century. The writer, Kamal, is not a typical novelist, and please try to connect into this. Ruhayim wrote the novels while holding the post of Major General, a Liwa, in the Egyptian police force. In one interview, Ruhayim explains his great interest, and you can see the quote here or the translation that I added into his word, that historic period, he's talking about this historic period rooted in thought when Jews were a part of Egyptian society, when Jews were Egyptian citizens in all aspects. The novel deals with Egyptians of the Jewish faith, not of Jews, but primarily Egyptians, like any other Egyptian of a different denomination. It was determined to write about, he said, I was determined to write about these Egyptian Jews so that, and here I will underline, that people who had not experienced that historical era would be acquainted with them. I wanted to present a picture of the Egyptian Jew as a person, far from the stereotypical and defective image identifying him as a sheep and having a long nose, etc., etc. I presented a human being. Now, these TV series and literature work were extensively reviewed on local social media and received diverse attitudes regarding the Jewish past and their relations to Egyptian culture and history. Many who sympathize with the new narrative referred or used to refer to a bygone era labeled Al-Zaman al-Gamil, the beautiful period, a time when the social and cultural fabric of Egypt was rich and diverse, and even the political sphere was characterized by political pluralism. This nostalgic description obviously suffers from historical blindness, disregarding the hardships that characterized Egypt in the first half of the 20th century. Still, I suggest that the beautiful period narrative deserves to be examined as an expression that is more directed to the present than the past. This renewed discussion of the past emerged in the context of the civic uprising of 2011, which, in addition to overthrowing President Hosni Mubarak, carried the slogan, "Ashab yurid iskat al-nizam," the people want the downfall of the regime. This call was not realized, but expressed the hope of millions of Egyptians' desire to establish a different social and political order. I suggest that this cinematic and literary works not only normalize Jews as human beings, but an act of reclaiming the Jewish past and the history of Egyptian society at large. So it has two, I would say, key dimensions. The first is an act of reclaiming the Jewish past. The other one, or the second, is the reclaiming the history of Egyptian society at large. Another important dimension of the public debate focuses on the issue of who was responsible for emptying Egypt of its minority communities, minority communities in plural, including the Jews. For decades, and this is something we should underline, for decades, this question was considered taboo. Today, this very same issue has been frequently discussed in popular talk shows, the press, and the social media. It also triggered a debate among local professional historians and other writers over the role Jews played in various fields and the circumstances and responsibility for their mass exodus from Egypt. This development is clearly reflected in Muhammad Abul Rar, a second book, you can see it now on screen, on the Jews of Egypt, titled "The Jews, Yahud Masr fil Qarn al-Ashrin," the Jews of Egypt in the 20th century. And more interestingly and more sensitively, I would underline the subtitle, كيف عاشوا ولماذا حاربوا, how they lived and why they left. Now, this title corresponds with the debate I just mentioned in the last 4 or 5 minutes. It is also, I think, fascinating to see how deeply rooted the debate over the Jewish past is in the intra-Egyptian political struggle, which is a very important dimension that I would like to put in this talk. Since the beginning of his term, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has taken steps that aimed to separate, I would say, to separate his role from his predecessor. While the security forces fought an all-out war against the Muslim Brotherhood movement, the president made clear his commitment to complete equality between Egypt's citizens, regardless of religion, ethnicity, and gender. The autonomous status of religious minorities, including the Jewish minority, was recognized, in fact, in the 2014 new constitution, as cited in paragraph 3. You can see it now on screen. The principles of the laws Sharai, the principles of the laws of Egyptian Christians, that means mainly Copts, Egyptians, Christians and Jews, are the main source of regulating their personal status, religious affairs, and selections of their spiritual leadership. Now, the controversy following the Egyptian government's decision to fund the extensive restoration of synagogues, first and foremost, the Eliyahu Hanavi synagogue in Alexandria. You can see it here. This is after the renovation. Beautiful monument, an historical and beautiful monument in Alexandria. This restoration illuminates how safeguarding Jewish heritage is a platform for disputes between political rivals in today's Egypt. In other words, the fierce debate over the Jewish past and heritage reveals a fierce debate over chapters in the history of modern Egypt and the controversy in Egyptian society regarding its regime and its image in the present time, not only in the past. Well, artificially, a political line is drawn or can be drawn between the opponents. The proponents of preserving Jewish heritage in Egypt support the Sisi regime or find it a reasonable compromise. At the same time, on the opposite side stand the fierce opponents of President al-Sisi and his regime. And the controversy over the Jewish past, the image of the Jewish community, the issue of restoration of synagogues or a Jewish cemetery, all this gets into this political rivalry between the regime and these opponents, I would say. Now, encouraged, I would like to move now to give you a couple of examples about safeguarding Jewish heritage, I would say on the ground in Egypt. Okay, so I would say that encouraged by changes within the Egyptian public, especially among the youth, Magda Harun initiated an unprecedented number of projects to preserve Jewish heritage. Her national and political vision was and is hand in glove with Egyptian society's revisionism regarding the Jewish past. It is also consistent with the Egyptian Antiquity Protection Law, number 117, which refers, I quote, to Islamic, Coptic, and Jewish monuments, end of quote. Now, we should, again, take this as an example, in addition to what I already cited from the 2014 Constitution. We have a lot of references in the, I would say, official level to the Jewish past, to Jewish heritage, to Jewish monuments, despite the fact that the number of Jews that still live or remain in Egypt is very tiny. Now, the direct affinity of Jewish heritage to local society and culture was expressed clearly in the numerous interviews Magda Harun gave. And here I would try to just to show a 2 minutes video in which in fact it was included in the second documentary by Amir Ramses that I mentioned earlier in this talk. So let's see that it worked. Can you hear?
Yeah.
ده معبد المعادي، معبد مائل بيتون، اتبنى في سنة 1934 بس الأرض اشترت في 1929. ده جزء من مسؤوليتي إن أنا أحافظ على التراث ده، لأن التراث المصري اليهودي مختلف عن أي تراث. في الخمسينات والأربعينات ده كان جو تاني خالص، يعني مصر كانت دولة كوسموبوليت وكلهم عارفين أنا يهودية وكلهم بيحترموني وكلهم. هحاول قدر المستطاع إن أنا أحافظ على تراث يهود مصر لنسلمه للشعب المصري، لأن هذا تراثكم وهو ملككم وملك بلدكم. راجية أن تعتنوا به من بعدنا، وأن تتذكروا أن كان في مصر يهود يعيشون ومندمجين في كل أوجه الأنشطة في الحياة.
Okay, I'll stop here. I will just translate to you. I think there was no subtitles, right? So I will translate the last two sentences, which are directly goes to the topic we discuss here. And this is what Magda has to say about the direct affinity of Jewish heritage to local society and culture in this video. I quote, "I will try as hard as I can to preserve the heritage of Jews in Egypt so that we can hand it later on to the Egyptian people because this is your heritage. It belongs to you and your country, hoping that you will preserve it for future generations." End of quote. And this statement is not unusual in Magda's, I would say, statements, public statements in the media. It repeats quite a lot of time. And the bottom line here goes to the question: whose heritage is this Jewish heritage belong to? Who? Is it for the expatriates, Egyptian Jews who lives now in North America, in Israel? Is it belong to the only to the tiny Jewish community remain in Egypt? Or, as Magda suggests, it belongs to the Egyptian people because it is their heritage, as they have other cultural heritage from this long history of Egyptian history and cultural heritage. Now I would like to give another expression of how Magda, in fact, I would say, putting words into action. And here I would refer to Magda's idea, which she was able to realize, to redefine the drop of milk association, le goût de lait, by law, which now includes, I will not go, we don't have the time to talk about this association. It was established in 1917 as a shelter for poor kids, you know, providing some basic schooling, clothes, food for the needy families. But somehow it happened, and Magda discovered that this association is still registered with the relevant ministry in Egypt, and she decided to redefine this association, the goût de lait, le goût de lait, by law, which is now, not then, now includes the aim of guaranteeing the preservation of Jewish heritage. Now, the formal act, which was verified by the state authorities changed the game's rules regarding regarding Jewish heritage in Egypt. Following the update of the bylaw, dozens of Egyptian citizens have joined the Drop of Milk Association, and they are highly committed to preserving Jewish heritage. And from the statement that I collected from members in this association, it almost all of them saying the same. They see their activity, they see their commitment as an expression of a patriotic Egyptian stand. It's not necessarily that they adopted here, I don't know, something like a foreign narrative, something that is coming from Israel, or I don't know, from other places about this heritage. No, the opposite. They see their commitment as an expression of a patriotic Egyptian stance. Now, the projects that have been promoted since 2014, and Magda started her term in 2014. So the projects, and I would add that I was privileged to be involved in different ways in these projects. So this project include the removal of tons of garbage. You can see now on the screen, I think. You can see it? Yeah, so this is a photo taken in Basatin cemetery, oldest cemetery in Egypt, in one of the oldest in the whole of the world, a Jewish cemetery. So it includes the removal from this very cemetery, tons of garbage accumulated over decades in the cemetery. Similar project took place in synagogues, removing tons of garbage from synagogues and their yards. In addition, extensive work has been done mainly in three synagogues as part of a plan to reuse these sites for cultural and social activity. These sites or these synagogues are not being used now or today for praying or as synagogues, but the very idea was to preserve the buildings, to preserve the sites, not to change anything, any artifacts, any item, not the heichal, not the teva, not anything in there, and to use it for cultural and social activity. In addition, Magda initiated what we call the Cairo Jewish Synagogue Study. And this provided the first comprehensive documentation of Cairo's synagogue. I in fact, headed this documentation, and during this work, thousands of books contained in Cairo's synagogue were not only found, but reorganized by subjects and cataloged. This work is in the process. We're still working on this. We're already estimating, the estimation is like 10,000 volumes of books, some of them very rare manuscripts that all being found by us in Cairo's synagogues. Behind these closed doors for after decades that these places were not being open. And during this project of the synagogue study, we were able to find this, I would say, extremely rare volumes. In addition, extensive efforts were devoted to safeguarding Basatin. We just see in the photo over here, to safeguard this what left of Basatin, and a small plot remaining of a Karaite family burial site not far from Basatin. In addition, the community has hosted various events in synagogues. It can be like you can see now here, it can be a Rosh Hashanah ceremony, it can be Hanukkah, and it can be Passover. And each of these holidays is being marked by the community in one of the synagogues, and they can see the some Egyptians, some foreigners coming to this event. The only Jew in the event might be Magda Harun herself, but the others coming to show respect, to identify, to sympathize with this preservation of the Jewish heritage. Now, allow me to move fast to, I would say, some kind of conclusion I would like to put forward in this talk, and it is mainly about how we, mainly historians, but not only historians, I would say scholars who are interested in these questions of preservation of Jewish heritage in Arab and Muslim context. So here I would like to talk a little bit, Angy, about a material history and its importance as I see it. Excuse me. The main conclusion from this talk is that the Jewish sites and items still exist in Arab and Islamic countries should not be seen and studied as simply silent relics of the past. On the contrary, these sites and products constitute authentic materials through which the story of the Jewish community can be retold. I suggest that the material history that remains from the Jewish past is a sort of living archive, and I will try to explain what I mean by this framing, living archive. This unique archive includes hundreds of synagogues and cemeteries scattered throughout the Middle East and North Africa, countless Judaica items, and textual and visual documentation from various periods, some of them very ancient, others are recent, contemporary. This archive is also sustained by local culture products, and this is important to add to our discussion. This archive is sustained by local culture products like documentaries, popular TV series, and literature that deal with the Jewish presence in the past and its present heritage. Declarations by officials, state ceremonies, and the public discourse on the subject throughout the media and social networks provide a wide variety of documentation. Moreover, the discovery of new archives, sites, and genizot demonstrates that the living archive continues to be filled with quality products, even today. And we have heard a couple of examples. So think about the American intervention in Iraq and the removal of this treacherous Jewish archive to the United States, and I can imagine the studies that one day will come out of this archive. But this is just one example. I can also add to this that just several months ago, a kind of a new Geniza was found in Basatin cemetery, the very same cemetery that I mentioned earlier, and 165 sacks of Geniza had been taken by the authorities, by the antiquities, and hopefully one day this will be turned back to the community and will be available for us scholars to study. But the point here is that that this living archive continues to be filled with quality products. It's not about a discussion about some remote past, something that already been ended decades ago, maybe in 1948. It takes us to explore, I would say, much more about this Jewish past, and not least the present time and the preservation of Jewish heritage. Now, the significance of the unique materials within this living archive stems from their reuse, preservation, and reference in local cultural practice and public discourse. In other words, and I would like to emphasize here something. The existence of a Jewish site is a precondition for preserving local Jewish heritage. This is obvious. But it is not sufficient one. It is the reinterpretation given to synagogues or cemeteries that replants them in the local social and cultural context, thus giving them renewed meaning and relevance in reshaping the image of both past and present. And I think this is something that we should think through when we're talking about a preservation. It's not the preservation of relics of the past alone, only. The point here that I would like to emphasize or underline is that the reinterpretation given to synagogues or this cultural history, replanted them, integrating them in the local social and cultural context, this what gives them a new meaning and relevance to our discussion about Jewish heritage in the past, but also in the present, maybe in the future. Maybe it will allow us to speak about the future of the Egyptian Jewish past, the future of the Moroccan Jewish past, or Tunisian, or Turkish, so on, so forth. I would like to conclude with a kind of a personal note, if I may. My encounters and personal relationships with the remaining Jews in Cairo and their offspring, who had all been born Muslim, all of their kids, and with other Egyptians involving in the Drop of Milk Association, for instance. These encounters and personal relationships helped me understand the profound significance of remaining in Egypt as Jews, and the affinity between Jewish individuals and sites, Egyptian society and culture. In other words, my work in Cairo helped me develop the theme of remaining as an axis, with one end connected to Egypt's Jewish past and the other to present-day heritage preservation. This perspective allows for examining Jewish history as an Egyptian topic and not merely a question of Judaism or Jews. This inquiry positions the internal Egyptian context at the center. In this broad context, I consolidated my perception of the feasibility and need to reflect on the history of the Jewish community as an Egyptian Jewish history. I stop with this note and would be happy to open to your comments.
Thank you so much for a fascinating talk. There are a few questions, but I would like to also refer to something that you said at the end. Then I will turn to the questions from participants, and then I will also add my own. But before we open the floor, I was thinking when you are now referring to the question of remaining and the theme of remaining and the importance of remaining, and how remaining I was thinking that how remaining is an activity that necessarily points at the future. One doesn't remain just out of mere stubbornness, but you remain because the past is still active. The past is not a relic. You remain because the past is heritage. So I was thinking about also this this differentiation that you were making between heritage and relic. So if the past is a heritage and not a relic, then remaining is a way of pointing at the future and passing this on, as Magda was saying, like passing this on to the next generation of Egyptians, not only of expat Jews, like expat Egyptian Jews or Jews of the world, but the next generation of Egyptians. So for that to remain heritage and not become a relic, somebody alive needs to be there. There has to be, even if tiny, a group of people that decide to remain. This is not, it was just a comment, something that I found very inspiring and very, very beautiful. Beyond that, I wanted to ask you how also, like, I think that your research on the Jewish community of Cairo addresses also the question of memory and ownership. Whose memory is that, and whose memories are kept in the archives? And can Egyptian Jewish memories be a shared space beyond ethno-national politics? And what happens when memories confront national history? When the memories of individuals confront national history and the writing of national histories. And finally, I wanted, I have more questions, but I want to open the floor for other people. But I do want to ask something about the question of nostalgia, and about, like, how you were saying that many of the local cultural products sort of refer to the Jewish past as a way of speaking about the present, which I think, I'm sure you agree, is the case in many other contexts. It's also the case in Morocco. It was even the case in Spain in the 19th century when there were no Jews. And the question of the Jewish past as a Spanish past was also used as a way of speaking about the present of Spain, and about and it was a way of projecting a different future. So I was thinking about this question of the use of the past, and the very common, it is a common critique that this is nostalgia, that is a nostalgic discourse, that is there's an idealization of that past. And I was thinking about this, something that Deborah Starr and Eyale Sagibizawe shared with us last year, about how nostalgia is also critique. Nostalgia can also be a critique of the present. Nostalgia and so there is a value, epistemic value, and also moral value in this nostalgia. Fine, there are many things one may criticize, but there are also things that one can save and reclaim. This is where I just comment some things that came up, and then if you can refer to them, and then we can open the floor.
You want me to refer to them and then we open, or you want to collect?
Yeah, if you want to, yeah.
I will do it very briefly, not to repeat points that already been taken, and points that we in fact agree on. So first and foremost, everything that I try to study about this Jewish past and present is coming from a serious, I would say, focusing on the Egyptian context, to take it out of this kind of, I would say, ghetto mentality that we can discuss the Jewish history in Morocco or in Spain or in Egypt as it is disconnected with society, culture, I mean local society, local cultural developments and the politics. And my point here is that it is not accidental that the shift has taken place following the 2011 uprising, which is to me as historian, it's a beginning of a new chapter in the history of the region, including North Africa, means including Morocco. Okay, I see this as a new chapter. We are in the very beginning of writing this chapter, and very far from the point that we can, in a very precise wording, conclude this chapter. What I mean is that we all know the difficulties and the frustration that followed the Arab Spring, what is called the Arab Spring. But my talk was about some, I would say, marginal dimension, quote unquote, of this Arab Spring, in which, and this is the point, some new questions have been raised. For some of them, for the first time, they were taboo. Where are all these minorities? You know, this is a basic question for history. Where are the Greeks? Where are the Italians? The Malteses? Where are the Jews? Where are you, Moshe? As one writer, where are you, Moshe? Where are you? Okay, the question of where are you, I would say, came to the forefront following this uprising, which seriously shocked the Egyptian society. And it started by questioning about the biggest or the largest Egyptian minority group, the Copts, which at least constitute 10% of the society.
Today.
And 10%. And Egypt is over 100 million people. So we are talking about millions of Christian Copts living in Egypt, and their civic and even heritage was in question. And they participated, of course, in the uprising. And part of this participation was asking this question from, I would say, beginning. It's like, what is happening with the Copts? But then something extremely interesting happened. People start asking questions in the as part of the political rivalry within Egypt. So we all know that you have the regime and you have the Muslim Brotherhood. This is an all-out war between these rivals. Okay, we all understand this. The question of the minority rights, minority heritage, minority past and present get mixed with this political struggle. And the lines are the divide is very clear, sharp. The regime, at least in the rhetoric level, support minorities' rights and preservation of heritage. The Muslim Brotherhood on the other side.
Of course,
okay? Yeah. So we're talking about the past, we're talking about this relic or not relics, but it has a lot to say or to do with, I would say, today's Egypt. Who are we as Egyptians? This is the question. It's not only why the Jews left, but who are we as Moroccans? Who are we as Egyptians? Are we to be only Muslims, a Muslim society that it cannot be inclusive to minority groups? And this kind of discourse has intensified, I would say, after 2011. I completely agree with Debbie Starr that nostalgia or the nostalgic dimension of this debate is very important, because we should not see nostalgia as something simple, like longing for this remote past. Everything was so beautiful. It is not this. To talk about Jewish past, or to talk about in a nostalgic way about the Jewish past, is to say something significant about Egyptian present time.
Absolutely.
That's the point. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so much. Okay, I'm going to turn now to the questions. There are so many questions. So I'm going to, there is only one person that has asked to ask her question personally, but I'm going to go in order, okay? So someone asked, Amy Israel Pelletier asked, how is Nasser perceived, represented in Egyptian popular and political cultures today? Wait, hold on. Oh, sorry, I skipped a couple. Sorry. Harriet Maglin asked, I recently had the great pleasure of visiting the synagogue in Alexandria. It was quite moving. Peter Geffen just asked, Peter Geffen is the director of the gap year program Kivunim. And he says, I would add that just this past Shabbat, for the third year, Kivunim students have conducted Shabbat egalitarian tefillah in the synagogue of Bart Dakira in Essaouira, together with Andrea Zulay, doing exactly what we are speaking of. The rebuilding of that synagogue is now both a historical site for Morocco and at the same time a Jewish religious cultural site for Jews from all over the world. Our students have been so enriched by these experiences due to the same process, and most excitedly, Magda has made arrangements for them to do the same this spring in Cairo. So there's going to be a group of Kivunim students that are going to go to Cairo. Rick Gold says, I appreciate the concept of living archives. Any more thoughts about where they should be kept or located? Padma Basiuni says, in Egypt, the beautiful phrase coined by Professor Meital refers to the existing synagogues and cemeteries. These are living archives rather than relics, a heritage of the Egyptian people of all denominations. As the head of the Jewish community in Cairo, Ms. Magda Haroun underscored. Now, Amina Bukail wants to ask her question. So please go ahead. Amina?
Okay.
Yeah,
Hi,
Rita.
good evening. I am Amina
Good
Boutail from Algeria. I am from Algeria. I am working on Sephardic heritage here in Algeria, and I am working especially on this question: what remain of Jewish elements today in Algeria or North Africa? And really, I really appreciate your conclusion, Professor Meital, because we have this paradox, this Jewish element, cultural element manifested in daily life, but at the same time, we have this huge silence. It's still taboo. And the only answer we heard why the Jews, they are not here, the only answer, they choose La France in the case of Algeria. My question to Professor is, do you think that the heritage of Egyptian community received deeply study among modern scholars? And also my second question, what about heritage in Judeo-Arabic of Egyptian Jews? And thank you again.
Should I ask a couple more questions, or should you answer this first batch and then we go? Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going in the same order, but you will find yourself in my in the answers. I hope so. So I would say that while my study focuses on the Egyptian context, powerful expressions of this trend are currently, I would say, reverberating definitely in Morocco, definitely, and to a lesser extent in other Arab Muslim countries. Now, this has to do with Amina's Bukil, if I'm getting your name correct, in the last remark. I'm aware of the very, I would say, small steps that has been taking place in your country, in Algeria. This is just right the beginning of something. For me, as a historian, it will need more of material and more of expressions, especially in the public debate or discourse, to see this, if it fits into the concepts that I described here. What I mean is that, and I think this is the more important, is that this lecture or this talk focuses on Egypt. But because I believe that the context is wider, and the context is the struggle following the 2011 uprising with this new chapter, as I described it, because I think this is the, the backdrop, this is the background for the discussion. I think that expressions of this trend in some places like Morocco are currently exist. If we compare, even here, Angy, if we compare the number of projects in Morocco that took place since 2011 to Egypt, then the scope of the projects and the support of the kingdom to safeguarding Jewish heritage is by far more wide and deep than the situation in Egypt. I hope one day we will have this, kind of open public opinion in general, response from the authorities, which is very important as the situation is in Morocco. We are not there. We are not there. In this, I would say, it is important to say, and I didn't in the talk, I would say, address the challenges ahead of preservation of Jewish heritage in Egypt, the challenges, and just to mark a few of them. So one challenge is, of course, the lack of financial resources. This needs a lot of money, and according to the Egyptian system, it is almost impossible to, it's very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult to take money from outside the country. Definitely not from Israel. Okay, so this should be there. Okay, but in addition to the lack of financial resources, I would say there are two other kind of challenges, not to say obstacles. One is that, as it happened in not only Egypt, but after a serious civic uprising, the authoritarian system in Egypt is much more than one voice. This might become as a surprise to some of us, but I think this is correct. The ruling system, within the system, you have at least 2 or 3 schools about how to go forward in Egypt. And the question of minorities, including the Jews, is part of this discussion. So we have within the system, within the ruling system, we have those who are very conservative. These are old guards. They don't want to see their cheese moving to other places. And they are totally against, they're trying to stop everything. Just to stop everything. It can be, they would not allow the community to use synagogues. In Egypt, everything you need is coming from the security apparatus. Within this system, you have a lot of conservatives, old guards that are not in the same, I would say, line with Magda Harun, for instance. Okay. On the other hand, you have the president of the republic coming in a public statement, and he says something very, I would say, intriguing. He said, for many decades, we stopped building churches for the Copts in Egypt. And we're talking here about millions of people. Even getting the permit to renovate a church was not an easy task. And the president came in a very famous statement in Sharm el-Sheikh, and he said the following: not only that we build now for the Copts, we will build synagogues or renovate synagogues if there is a need for Jews in Egypt. This is unprecedented. This is unprecedented. And he's giving a lot of attention to establish his, I would say, a reputation as safeguarding minorities' rights. To change even Al-Azhar, this Islamic institution, to change the rhetoric about others, not Muslim, which means Jews or Christians. So he addressing this, and he's trying to do this, but what I'm trying to say is that he's the head of, he's the top of the pyramids, he's the Rais. But at the same time, within this deep state, you have more than one voice. And working in this setting is a huge challenge. And the last challenge is the public opinion itself. We can talk about writers, and we can talk about film producers, and we can talk about talk shows. These are all, kind of part of the elite or the upper middle class, and they are very supportive and open and see this as their heritage. exactly as Fatma just said, that this is true. This is exactly like this. At the same time, the Egyptian society is much more complex. And there are sectors that are totally against this trend and do not see the logic of preservation of Jewish heritage in the poor economy situation in Egypt, for instance. Okay, so again, we should not, I think, ignore these voices when we're talking about preservation of the Jewish heritage. Now, it is important, I think, again, to underline that the scope of preservation of the Jewish heritage, despite all these challenges, the scope of preservation of Jewish heritage in Egypt and Morocco has ignited a clear tendency to frame the Jewish past as an integral and positive part of the local historical and cultural heritage. Far from being alien to Egyptian and Moroccan life and culture, these communities and their heritage are now regarded by, I would say, a growing number of Egyptians and Moroccans as essential elements of the Egyptian and Moroccan past. And this is the point. This is the new trend. To the question about the future, well, no one is a prophet here, and no one can, I would say, predict exactly where we're going or heading with all this. I think this is very positive development that Egyptians and Moroccans, if we put again Morocco into our talk, see this Jewish heritage as essential elements of their own history and heritage, cultural heritage. And I don't think that they, some would say, well, Yoram, it is now trendy. It's like a fashion to speak this language. No, I don't buy this. It comes from something deep within the society. It coming from everywhere, from the politics. It coming from the cultural discourse. No one is putting a gun to their head and speak like this about the Jews. Talking about this reference to the visit by the student to Essaouira in Morocco, well, someone sponsored the establishment of Beit el-Zakira in Essaouira, the House of Memory, a kind of exhibition or museum in Essaouira that sharing or telling the story of the Jewish community in there. No one forced them to do something like this. And again, I believe that it is not only about dollars or tourism. It's not only about, it's not coming only from there. Yes, they gain a lot with this rhetoric. I mean, the states and in general, the Moroccans or the Egyptians, definitely they're gaining a lot of credit. But I would say they deserve this. They deserve, those who support this safeguarding deserve it. Moreover, it is important for us. Yes, this workshop is about Jewish modernities and heritage. Fine. But it would be, I think, a mistake not to examine this in the wider context of minorities. It's not only about Jews. It's about the Amzighi in Morocco.
Absolutely.
It goes far, far beyond the questions of the local Jewish Moroccan community or the Egyptian Jewish community. To Amina Boukel, just to sum up, I would say that I would love to hear more about works like the work you do, and and maybe to contribute in any way, at least in exchange of ideas about how to play with this factors that must be included in your study.
Yeah, so if you want to be in touch with Professor Meital, just I mean, his email is available. You can just Google it. But if you can't find it, email me or any of the or Yuval, and we will be very happy to connect you.
Yeah, I just wanted Angie to put a word about Abdel Nasser, and that this is very significant. We are talking about the leader, I would say the pioneer leader of Arabism in the 1950s and the 1960s. And Abdel Nasser's influence definitely goes behind Egypt, from Morocco to Iraq and the region in general. Talking about Algeria, very difficult to talk about the FLN, Front Libération Nationale, without a reference to Abdel Nasser or Egypt under Abdel Nasser. Today, it is very interesting to see that I would say a growing number of Egyptians, not only today, but in recent years, addressing or readdressing the Nasserite era, coming with new questions. And the question of minorities cannot be avoided when we speak about the Nasserite era, especially because the massive exodus of Jews from Egypt happened in the time between the 1956 Suez War and the 1961-62, the adoption of socialist laws in Egypt. This is the crucial time, and it all been run under this Nasserite regime. Now, it is important to emphasize that, in part at least, Sisi's regime, very much like Mubarak before him, they are a kind or a sort of continuation of this Nasserite regime. We are talking about the very same authoritarian system that was established in the 1950s. A lot of changes during the time in the 1970s and the 1980s after, but the system itself, this Republican system, deeply rooted in the Nasserite era. However, supporting for Nasserite ideas today in Egypt, I would say, is just in the margins. Just in the margins. Nasserite are not a dominant political party or sector in Egypt. Far, far from this.
Yoram, we have only 7 more minutes, so there are so many questions that I would like to follow up with, but I want to respect the time of our participants as well as yours. So there's like a few more comments and questions. Mark Dweck asks who is paying for the renovation of the synagogues in Egypt, the government or Jewish donors? Albert Gabay says we should be very grateful to Professor Meital for working tirelessly for the preservation of the Jewish heritage in Egypt. Thank you, Professor Meital. James Klein asks how many Jews live in Egypt, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Angy Israel Pelletier. How is Nasser perceived, represented? I think I already asked this question. Yeah, so and you already referred to it. Oh, wait, and Angy Israel Pelletier asks, there are today Jewish Egyptian writers who write in French, English, Hebrew, Italian, etc. Are there works being translated in Arabic, for example? I'm thinking of Paula Jacques, Tobi Nathan, the late Edmond Jabez, Jacques Hassoun. And this is the last question. Yes.
Okay, I'll do it very briefly. We have just 5 minutes, I assume,
Yes.
something like that. Yes, translation is very important to Arabic, and the number of translations into Arabic is growing by a day. Jacques Hassoun, that you just mentioned, so his book was translated by Yusuf Darwish, a Jewish Karaite, a Jew, and published by Dar el Shuruk, and got a lot of reviews, very positive reviews about the book. Yeah. So and this is just one.
Edmond Jabez has been translated to Arabic.
Who?
Edmond Jabez.
Edmond Jabez is a great hero of some of these supporters of safeguarding the heritage. Some of his poem been translated, but not the full volume. As for the financing the restoration, Mr. Duek asked, so the Egyptian government refused to take donation or support from outside Egypt. It happened just twice that they took support. The first one was the renovation back in the 1980s of the Ben Ezra, famous Geniza synagogue that restored by the support of the coming from Jews outside of Egypt. And the other one was a renovation, a renovation after the earthquake that hit the Cairo in 1992, renovation of Shara Shamayim synagogue. So this is for this. I'm so happy that Albert Gabay joined us. He's a dear friend. I miss you a lot, and maybe next year we will meet when I'm coming to your neighborhood, to Philadelphia. As for the what else? The number of Jews. Well, James, I think, asked this question. My answer would be this, James. It is fascinating to see that at a time when only a handful of Jews remain in Egypt, these considerably more positive expressions for the Jewish past and preservation are being heard and taking place. And this is the point. The number is, I would say, less than a handful. Okay, the few Egyptians. Again, important to emphasize, I hope following this talk, to see the importance of the positive expressions for the Jewish past that being heard and taking place in Egypt. Now, in addition to this, I don't know the exact number, Mr. James, but I would tell you that I would say, God's feeling is that in Egypt you have thousands of Egyptian citizens of Jewish roots, with Jewish roots. I mean, these are families that convert to Islam or Christianity, and they stayed in their homeland in Egypt. They get married with Muslim or not Muslim, and they have their families. And I can tell you that in so many occasions that I was in Cairo, that someone will grab me like by the hand and saying, Professor, I have to share something with you. My grandmother, my grandfather, this kind of line story. Yeah. So they were Jews. And here I am today I would like to see for the first time the synagogue. Do you have information? Do you have information about my relatives buried there in the cemetery? I have list of this. Can I use this? Can you try help me finding something? So this coming from Egyptian who are Muslim, Egyptians or Copts living in Egypt, but they do have, I estimating their numbers in thousands.
Wow. Okay, well, thank you so much for this. It was fascinating, and I'm sure we all live with the feeling that we would like to ask so many more questions, but hopefully there will be an occasion to follow up and to go back to all this. Thank you, Professor Yoram Meital.
Angy,
thank you
so
all for
much.
attending.
Thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this important seminar, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I hope more of this discussion will continue. It is not relevant only to Egypt, and of course, last point that I would like to mark is that my heart and thoughts are with my dear friend Yuval during these difficult times. Today, the funeral is coming on Thursday, definitely in Beersheba, and I will be there.
Yes, yeah, we all join you in that. We are all here from here with Yuval. And I would like to remind everybody that our next meeting is on March 23rd with Lital Belinko Sabah. And the title of her talk is How do Judeo-Spanish proverbs and tales communicate with us, and how do we communicate with them? We will see you all then, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.